The night the soldiers arrived, the rain was already wrong. Not in the way a storm misbehaves when the wind has too much to say. Not in the way thunder grumbles when the sky is arguing with itself. No, this rain fell like something was pushing it, shaping it, sculpting every drop into a warning we pretended not to hear. It came down in intervals, as if the sky had a heartbeat. A slow, heavy thud, then stillness, then another thud, louder, closer. I'd lived near Rainback Forest for 6 years, long enough to know when nature was playing fair and when she wasn't. That night, she was hiding something, tucking it behind the curtains of water and begging anyone passing through to turn back. We didn't. The logging crew had vanished 3 days earlier. No distress call, no tracks out. Just their equipment found in the mud, some pieces snapped, others twisted, and one radio still clutched in the hand of a man nobody ever identified. When investigators played the tape back, they heard a scream no bear could make, no man could hold, and no wolf had any business knowing. Something layered, something guttural enough to rattle the recording itself. The audio tech said it sounded like a voice that wasn't meant to exist anymore. A voice pulled out of a war the world had forgotten. So the forest was sealed off. And that's when they arrived. The Special Forces convoy rolled in like a procession of armored shadows, each vehicle steaming in the wet cold. No insignias, no unit patches, no names. Soldiers stepped out with eyes that didn't scan the tree line. They studied it like it was an old, familiar enemy. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was a civilian, a surveyor, a man who understood trees better than people. But I'd been the last to hear from the missing crew. I was the one who found the radio buried in the mud. And when I told the briefing officer what I'd heard, what I'd felt, he didn't dismiss me. He leaned in, as if hungry for the truth I didn't want to say out loud. Someone higher up decided I should guide Ghost Unit to the site. And I was too naive, too curious, too human to refuse. By late afternoon, the rain thickened, turning the world into a grey, trembling veil. The forest beyond the road bent with each gust, not away from the storm but toward it, like the trees were listening. By the time night fell, the sky had become a living thing. Thunder didn't crack, exhaled. Lightning didn't strike it, searched in the rain. The rain pulsed like a giant heart trapped above us. That was when I first heard the howl. It rose beneath the wind, threading through the storm like a needle pulling its own echo. Not loud, not sharp, a sound old enough to have forgotten its own name. It wasn't a call, it was a claim. A sound that declared the forest belonged to something else entirely. I froze. Some of the soldiers did too. Just for a moment. Sergeant Kane, Gostunus led, stepped beside me. His face was a slab of discipline carved by too many nights like this. His voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. That wasn't the wind, he said quietly. No, I whispered. It wasn't. Lightning flared, and for a heartbeat the tree line lit up in white fire. The shadows inside the forest moved, not retreating, not startled, waiting. And the rain, it stopped falling straight. It curved, bending mid-air, as though drawn toward some invisible center inside the woods. I should have left then. I should have begged them to turn around, but every instinct I had was drowned by the storm whispering, "You've already been chosen. You were heard. Come and see who's calling." Kane gave the order for final prep. Alvarez loaded his rifle with movements too precise to be calm. Pike tightened his vest until his hands shook. Mercer stared at the forest with a look that said he'd seen something like this before, and hoped he never would again. The world fell quiet, not silent, quiet, like the forest was taking a long breath before it spoke. Thud, then dash, boom. A thunderclap so violent it kicked mud off the ground. A tremor rolled through the pines. Soldiers staggered, the air shivered, and every raindrop within sight suddenly began to fall in spirals tight. Circular motions twisting downward around us like we'd stepped into the center of a storm that had eyes. Something inside that forest was watching, measuring, welcoming. The howl came again, closer this time, hungry. Sergeant Kane tapped my shoulder. Stay behind me. Ghost unit doesn't leave anyone behind. He didn't know how wrong he was. Some men don't come back from forests like Rainback. Some don't come back from what they learn inside them. And some things follow you home. As we stepped toward the tree line, the rain parted like a curtain, and the forest finally opened its mouth. The forest didn't start at the tree line. It started 10 feet before it. You could feel it like a pressure front, a change in weight, a subtle tightening in the chest. One step you were standing on muddy roadside gravel. The next, you were pressing against something invisible that didn't want you any closer. The soldiers felt it too. Half the convoy stayed behind as perimeter and rapid extraction. The other half formed up around Kane, weapons checked, faces unreadable. Their gear barely made a sound. Everything about them was built for silence. I didn't belong in that formation, but I walked there anyway, one step behind Kane, boots squelching, in mud, more nervously than I wanted to admit. Ghost unit, on me, he said. No shout, just enough voice to cut through the storm. They moved like one organism. Alvarez on the lefty sharp, door locked, Pike just behind, lips moving, counting, or praying, maybe both. Mercer on the right, flank scanning the tree line like he expected it to answer back. Kane glanced at me. Last chance to stay with the trucks. I almost did. The rational part of me screamed, "You're a surveyor, not a soldier. Your job is tree density and erosion models, not whatever this is." But underneath the fear, something else simmered. The radio, the scream, the sound that didn't fit any animal I knew. I shook my head. You'll need someone who knows the terrain. The logging path bends twice before it hits the worksite. If you go straight, you'll walk right into a ravine. Kane studied me for a second longer, then comfort aloud. You stay in the middle, he said. You follow my steps. If I tell you to run, you don't argue. You just run. Understood? He turned, lifted his hand, and with that small motion, Ghost Unit crossed into Rainback Forest. The moment my boot crossed that invisible line, the world changed. The storm outside the trees was loud, wild, inconsistent. In here, the sound became muted but somehow sharper, like we'd stepped into the echo of a storm, not the storm itself. Rain still fell, but it slipped through the canopy in thin, deliberate streams. Each drop seemed to know exactly where it is, wanted to land. The air was wrong to humid, yes, but cold in the wrong places. My neck felt icy, my hands felt warm. My breath fogged only in short bursts, not in a steady rhythm. Every forest has a soundscape. Insects, birds, rustling leaves, distant branches giving way. This one had nothing. Not one cricket, not one bird, no branches cracking under the weight of the rain. Just us, our footsteps, our slow breathing, and somewhere behind it all, a hum, low, subsonic, like a power line vibrating under the soil. Pike clicked his mic. Ghost 1-2 Overwatch. We are entering Grid Eco 7. Comms check. Static crackled back. Then a voice. Overwatch copies. Maintain uplink every 10 minutes. Thermal drone is inbound. Keep your heads low, boys. Copy, the radio hissed. Then for a heartbeat, the static twisted, the same way it had on the old tape. Something deep and inhuman leaked through the channel, just a sliver of sound before the connection normalized. Pike frowned, tapping the side of his headset. You hear that? No, Kane said too quickly. Keep moving. Alvarez shifted his grip on the rifle. Sir, with respect, that didn't sound like interference. Kane continued walking. You've all heard worse in worse places. Eyes up. We're 90 minutes from the last known logging site. He didn't deny it happened. He just refused to give it a name. We followed an old skid trailer path carved by heavy logging equipment months earlier. My flashlight traced the ground out of habit, reading the story the soil told. The mud should have been torn, rutted, messy from rainfall. Instead, the tracks were softened, edges blurred, as if something heavy had dragged itself over every line and groove, smoothing it all into one continuous smear. I knelt, ignoring the protest in Kane's eyes. See this? I whispered, pointing with my gloved hand. The skid marks from the equipment, these should be sharp, but something crossed over them. Recently, Mercer leaned in. Can you tell how many? I hesitated. One part of my brain wanted to say one big thing. Another part insisted that wasn't true. The impression wasn't footprints, not really. It was more like pressure waves. Rings like standing at the edge of a pond and seeing ripples meet each other, colliding and overlapping until you can't tell where one began. I can't, I admitted. But whatever it was, it moved like a group, like a pack, Pike muttered, and none of them wore boots. Kane straightened, clocks ticking. Johnston, stay in the middle. We keep moving. So we did. Every dozen yards, the forest changed. The trees grew closer together, branches weaving into shapes that almost looked purposeful. Knotted trunks resembled twisted spines, hunched and watching. Moss crawled along bark in streaks that resembled claw marks, long faded but not forgotten. At one point, Alvarez raised his fist and froze. Kane halted. Talk to me. Alvarez pointed ahead, voice low. Infrared's picking something up. Center, mass, 30 yards. Size of a wolf, no, bigger. It's not moving. We listened, nothing. Mercer slid a step to the side, rifle angled. Could be a deer bedded down. Pike shook his head. Thermal says, too hot, too dense. The rain above us shifted, pattering harder in one small zone ahead like a spotlight of water. Like the sky itself was marking the shape Alvarez saw. Kane slowly raised his rifle. Show me. Alvarez handed him the scope. Kane peered through, eyes narrowing. 5 seconds. 10. 15. His jaw began to tighten. Without a word, he flicked the scope off and handed it back. What was it? I asked. Kane didn't answer me. He addressed his team instead. New rule, he said quietly. If it looks asleep, assume it's not. If it looks dead, assume it's not. If it looks away from you, assume it already knew you were here. Alvarez swallowed. Sir, was that a yes or a no on the target? That was a, we don't waste ammo on bait, Kane replied. We keep moving. We stepped around whatever he'd seen, giving that patch of forest a wide berth. As we did, I caught a glimpse of it with my naked eye. Just a mound of fur and shadow under a deadfall. Motionless, too still. But as we passed, its ear twitched just once, and the rain above it fell harder, as if something unseen had just opened its eyes. We walked deeper. The trees closed behind us, swallowing any hope of clear retreat. The world outside the forest roads, vehicles, other humans began to feel imagined, like a past life I'd been foolish enough to believe in. Up ahead, the skid trail vanished. In its place, a clearing, the logging site, or what was left of it. bulldozers sat canted at broken angles. One crane arm had been bent backward like a snapped wrist. Tents were shredded, flapping in the storm wind like skin pinned to poles. The mud was churned into chaos. Boot prints, drag marks, deep gouges like something with claws had plowed through. And at the center of it all, half submerged in a pool of black water, lay the radio tower. Its antenna was snapped, its lights dead. But the speaker still hissed, a low, constant, static. Pike frowned, walking toward it. Careful, Kane warned. Pike crouched, turned at the volume knob. For a moment, only the storm's roar fed through the line. Then the static parted. A sound crawled out of the speaker, wet and ragged, like a growl forced through a broken throat. My spine turned to ice because I'd heard that sound before, on the tape, on the night the logging crew died. Only this time, it sounded closer, like the thing making it wasn't far away at all. It sounded like it was standing right behind us. The growl leaking from the broken radio tower wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It felt close, threading through the rising mist like something crawling into our ears, testing our reactions, tasting the fear rising off our skin. Pike stepped back so fast he nearly slipped. Mercer swung his rifle toward the tree line. Alvarez scanned the canopy. Kane didn't move at all, he just listened. Really listened. The growl deepened, crackling through damaged speakers. Not a bear's rumble, not a wolf's warning. This sound carried intention. It rose and fell in slow waves, as if the creature had learned how to mimic speech, but hadn't earned the right to speak yet. And underneath that sound, another noise bled through. A wet dragging sound. Mud shifting, branches pushed aside, claws sinking and rising in soft, deliberate rhythm. Positions, Kane whispered. Ghost unit formed a tight defensive arc, rifles trained halfway between the ground and the canopy, because none of us knew where this thing preferred to stand, or if it stood at all. I tried to breathe quietly, but the storm pressed down on us so heavily my lungs felt soaked from the inside out. The rain thickened again, but only in the clearing, not around the edges, not in the forest itself, just here like the sky was painting a target over our heads. The radio squealed sharply, as if something pressed its weight against the transmitter. Then it spoke. Not words, not anything with a meaning we understood. A single exhale. Long, low. Deliberate. Pike whispered, "It's copying us. It's listening to how we breathe." Kane shot him a look that should have silenced him, but didn't, because he realized Pike wasn't wrong. The growl wasn't an animal noise. It was adaptive, testing, repeating, learning. Lightning forked through the sky, and for the briefest instant, the clearing lit up like a photograph. That's when I saw it. A shape crouched at the far edge of the logging site, too still to be natural, too big to be human. The flash ended. Darkness swallowed everything. Mercer hissed, contacted my 12. Alvarez steadied his rifle. "I saw it 2 height, 2 meters, maybe more. Hold," Kane said. But the forest didn't hold. Something shifted across the clearing, silent but heavy enough that the ground trembled beneath my boots. I watched water ripple outward in perfect circles each time it stepped. "One target," Pike whispered. "No." My bones knew the truth before my brain caught up. The ripples weren't expanding evenly. They overlapped multiple centers of impact. I counted 3, then 4. Then I stopped counting because the number only climbed. The creatures weren't approaching. They were circling. "Thermal scan," Kane ordered. Alvarez raised the scope. "Sir, I'm trying, but the rain's interfering. It's bouncing off them in clusters." "What clusters?" Like the water doesn't want to touch them It bends away. Kane stiffened. In the dark, a branch snapped. Not a thin one, a thick limb cracked like a neck giving out. The sound wasn't ahead of us. It wasn't behind us. It was above us. I looked up, between swaying branches and dripping needles. Something moved, silhouetted just enough to reveal the outline of a massive limb, pulling itself into position on a high branch, then another, then a third, not perched like animals, poised like soldiers. Rain streamed down their bodies, but never struck their frit curved around them, bending in unnatural arcs as if they carried their own gravity. Mercer whispered the first real truth any of us had said aloud that night. They're using the storm as cover. And they were. With every move the creatures made, the rain shifted too. When they crouched, the downpour softened. When they moved, the storm swelled. I realized something then, something that hollowed out my spine. The storm wasn't a backdrop. It wasn't camouflage. It was communication. One of them dropped from the tree. Not jumped, dropped silently, landing with no splash at all. Weight absorbed into mud like the ground itself welcomed it. A tall shape unfurled from a crouch. Two amber eyes burned in the dark. They weren't bestial. They weren't wild. They were aware, as if a mind older than any human lived behind them. Alvarez's breathing spiked. "Sir, permission to engage." "No," Kane said immediately. "Sir, it's right in front of us, and that's exactly why you don't fire." The creature tilted its head, studying us with the kind of curiosity only predators earn. Then it inhaled, a slow, deliberate pull of air that scraped through the storm. The trees bent inward, sucked toward it by some unseen force. For a moment, the clearing felt like it was collapsing toward the creature's chest. Then, with a low, churning growl, it exhaled. The rain around us stopped. Not slowed, not lightened, stopped. In midair, frozen droplets suspended like beads of glass. Pike gagged. What is this?" Kane didn't answer. He couldn't. The creature lifted one clawed hand. Rain followed the gesture, sliding sideways, forming a spiraling circle around Ghost Unit, like a storm wrapping itself around prey. A faint whisper broke through the radio, this time clearer, sharper, a voice, a man's voice. "Don't shoot, don't tempt the rain." Then it cut off. The creature stepped forward. The frozen rain began to fall again. All at once, a solid wall of water slammed into us, and in that blinding surge of storm the werewolf attacked. The storm didn't explode around us. It collapsed like the sky emptied its entire weight in one violent drop. Rain slammed into the clearing so hard it flattened grass, hammered metal, and turned puddles into fountains. I couldn't see, could barely breathe, but I heard it. A shriek of mud, a shove of displaced air, the snap of something massive breaking the sound barrier in a space too small to contain it. Ghost Unit opened fire. Muzzle flashes shattered the dark in staccato bursts, each one catching the barest glimpse of a nightmare in motion. A claw, a jaw, eyes like molten amber cutting through the storm like searchlights. The creature was fast, no, not fast wrong, moving in straight lines for a fraction of a second before veering instantly as if gravity were a suggestion, not a law. Contact, LEFT. Mercer shouted, double quote, "No, -right, damn I Tim move." Pike yelled. The creature flickered between positions like a shadow skipping time. Bullets hit trees, mud, machinery, everything but the target. Kane barked commands, but even his voice carried something unfamiliar. Fear, don't cluster, spread out, watch. You're a blur shot between Alvarez and Pike. I saw only a ripple of water shaped like a man's torso, outlining the creature's muscles as it tore past. Pike spun, rifle flying into the dark. His scream cut through the storm. I sprinted toward him instinctively. Cain yanked me back by the collar. "Are you out of your mind?" "He's down. He's bait," Cain snapped, eyes blazing. "It's separating us." Pike's scream gurgled into silence. Somewhere beyond the logs, the forest swallowed the sound hole. Alvarez swept his light across the clearing. Rain bent around the beam in strange arcs. Whenever the light stuttered, I caught a glimpse of something massive, limbs weaving between trees, a silhouette climbing vertically up a trunk like a spider. Mercer fired. "It's above us." "Negative," Alvarez yelled. "Thermal," says Jesus Christ. "There's two." My stomach collapsed. There weren't just two. There were more. The shadows between the trees shifted in rhythm with the storm, shapes rising and falling like wolves circling the edge of a fire. The storm thickened where they moved, as if every creature pulled a chunk of weather along with it. A ring of rain, a ring of shadows. We weren't in a clearing anymore. We'd walked into an arena. Cain pushed me behind, a half-crushed bulldozer. "Stay low. If it goes for you, run toward the trucks." "What about you?" I asked. He chambered around with a sound like a verdict. "We make a path. We always make a path." Another roar tore the air apart closer than before, deeper, carrying a vibration that rattled my teeth. The mud at my feet rippled outward, not from footsteps, from sound. It could shake the ground with its voice. Rain slanted violently to the left, then stopped mid-air, swirling in a tight spiral next to a broken generator. A shape formed in the spiral. A towering werewolf stepped out of the vortex of water like the storm was its own doorway. Mercer screamed. "What the hell is that?" The creature lunged. He fired, bullets stitching a burning line across its chest, blood splattering the mud, but the werewolf didn't slow. It slammed into him with the force of a speeding truck. Mercer's body hit a stack of cuts, logs hard enough to break wood. Alvarez roared and charged, emptying half a magazine into the beast's flank. "Come on, you son of a..." The creature turned toward him, expression unreadable, head lowering like it was appraising Alvarez. Not angry, not even threatened, almost impressed. Then the forest behind them shifted. A second werewolf leaner, longer limb, descended from a tree, branches bowing under its slow, controlled descent. It landed silently behind Alvarez. He didn't see it, but the first werewolf did. It stepped back, letting the second one take him. "Alvarez behind you?" I screamed. He spun, but claws were already around him. He didn't even get out a full cry before he was dragged backward into the tree line, boots carving twin trenches through the mud. His rifle clattered to the ground. Cain cursed under his breath, not a soldier's curse, but a man's prayer breaking. "Two down," he whispered. "God, help us." The first creature, bigger, stronger. The one that had frozen. The rain lifted its head and inhaled deeply. Its chest expanded. The wind around us tightened. The rain slowed, then it exhaled. The storm pulsed outward in a shockwave. Branches snapped, metal groaned. The bulldozer beside me lurched an inch across the mud, and something inside that breath felt laced with intention. Cain steadied his rifle. "It's not killing us outright. It's testing us." "Why?" His eyes never left the creature. "Because hunters don't kill the moment they strike." Rain curled around the werewolf's claws, forming spirals that rose like steam. Lightning illuminated the furred arc, matted, scarred. A leader. A veteran of 1,000 storms. Its amber eyes locked on Cain, then on me, then past Metaward, the deeper forest, toward some place it wanted us to go. It wasn't circling randomly. It was driving us back herding us. Kane noticed it at the same time. "It's steering us," he murmured. Toward thunder cut him off. No, not thunder. A metallic groan echoing through the ground. A rolling, distant rumble. A door opening deep in the forest. A door big enough that the earth itself resonated with the sound. The werewolves froze, every single one of them, heads lifting toward the trees, ears erect, bodies tense. Something older than them was moving. Something they obeyed. Kane's voice trembled for the first time. "It's not the pack leading this hunt." Lightning flashed one savage burst, splitting sky and shadow for a heartbeat through the trees. I saw it. A structure buried, massive, concrete cracked like bone, steel chains hanging from its side. A bunker, and something inside. It was waking up. The werewolf stepped aside, inviting us deeper. Kane grabbed my shoulder. "Run," he whispered. "But run." I turned toward the only opening in the ring, of creatures the exact direction they intended for us. And the forest swallowed us whole. The forest didn't let us run freely. It guided us. Branches didn't slap our faces, they shifted aside. Roots didn't trip us, they bent just enough for our boots to clear them. The rain itself parted, funneling us toward a single direction, like the storm had hands pressed against our backs. The werewolves weren't chasing anymore. They didn't need to. We were moving exactly where they wanted us. Kane pushed ahead, rifled tight, every breath sharp and purposeful. "What the hell is happening?" I panted. "Something's controlling them," he rasped. "They're not herding us out. They're herding us in." "In where?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The ground trembled again, deep, metallic, resonant, like a massive hinge, shifting, like an old steel door dragging itself open after decades of sleep. The sound grew stronger as we ran. A low, rhythmic rumble. Clang, drag, clang, drag, drag. Whatever was making that sound wasn't walking on pause. Mercer stumbled behind us, clutching his ribs where the creature had slammed him earlier. Blood soaked his vest, but he kept pace anyway, more out of desperation than strength. We burst through a curtain of pine boughs. There it was, the bunker. If the forest was alive, this was its dead heart. A colossal concrete structure, half swallowed by roots and vines, built long before any of us were born. Rusted metal beams jutted from its sides like broken ribs. The front entrance a tenton steel blast, gross at crooked, one hinge hanging loose. Floodlights dash old, military-ish flickered faintly, fed by a generator that should have died. Decades ago, Gad Kane stopped dead. I'd never seen fear remake a man so quickly. "No," he whispered. "This place is supposed to be destroyed." Mercer wheezed, "Sir." What is this?" Kane didn't turn. He just stared at that battered steel door like it was a coffin he'd sworn never to open again. "Unit 12, he said quietly. "Lycan enhancement program. Cold War era. Black project, even the Pentagon pretends never happened." I felt the air leave my lungs. "You're saying the government—" "No," Kane snapped, voice hard. "Not the government. A shadow branch. Science without oversight. Warfare without morality." Mercer leaned against a concrete pillar, bleeding heavily. "You told us this OP was a containment mission." "It is. So what the hell broke containment?" Kane's silence was the answer. Rain struck the bunker roof in violent sheets. The earth rumbled again. Clang, drag, clang, drag. The sound was closer now, too close. We approached slowly, each step sinking into mud that seemed to warm beneath our boots. The bunker smelled wrong metal mold and something else, something feral and chemical at the same time, like a laboratory that had grown teeth. Inside the main doorway, claw marks slashed across the walls, deep gouges that exposed rebar and old wiring. Steel reinforcement rods were bent outward like wet clay, and on one section of wall, faded, stenciled letters, LEP Project 12, Subject Alpha Access, Restricted Authorized Personnel. Owen L. Wimmerser cursed under his breath. Subject Alpha, don't tell me. Kane raised a hand. Behind the door, a breath echoed, a deep, drawn-out inhale, slow enough to be deliberate, heavy enough to distort the air. I felt the pressure shift around us, like the creature's lungs were pulling the storm inward. Lightning burst overhead. The door shifted just an inch, but enough to see an eye staring through the gap. Not amber like the others, white, pale as bone, blind, yet somehow piercing through the dark. An enormous eye staggered back. Kane, what is that? He didn't blink. That's not a werewolf. His voice cracked. That's the one they made all the other werewolves from. A metallic groan tore the air. The door lurched open another foot, a massive claw longer. Then Kane's forearm slid into view, scraping the concrete. Sparks burst from the ground. The smell of ozone filled the air. Mercer lifted his rifle with trembling hands. Sir, say the word. Kane didn't respond. He couldn't, because Subject Alpha, this ancient, engineered monster, wasn't looking at Kane or Mercer, or me. It was staring past us into the trees, and as if answering its gaze, every werewolf in the forest howled at once, not aggressively, not even triumphantly. They howled like soldiers saluting a general. Rain bent inward, spiraling toward the bunker entrance in a vortex. Mud rippled outward. The ground vibrated like it remembered old pain. The bunker door slowly opened wider. I finally found my voice. What does it want? Kane whispered. It wants its war back. Lightning struck a century-old pine nearby. The flash illuminated the full silhouette inside the bunker, massive, scarred, muscles knotted like steel cables. Chains welded to its limbs dragging across the floor, ribs showing through furless patches of skin, and teed teeth to human at the base and two monstrous at the edges. It stepped forward, one dragging. Thunderous motion, and the werewolves outside fell silent. Kane grabbed my arm. His fingers dug in hard. Listen to me, he said. You'll want to run. Don't. That thing doesn't chase. It commands. Commands what? Everything else. As if to prove him right, Subject Alpha lifted its head and exhaled a blast of wind so powerful the trees outside bent like grass. Rain hissed against its skin. Lightning cracked. And then, from deep inside the bunker, another door slid open. Something else moved. Something bigger, something older than Subject Alpha, a second presence. Subject Zero, and the forest itself seemed to recoil. Mercer whispered, barely audible. Oh God, we were never supposed to see this. Thunder roared. The last hinge gave way, and Subject Alpha stepped fully into the storm. Subject Alpha filled the doorway like a myth made of muscle and midnight. Rain crashed against its body and split, wrapping around its frame as though the storm were bowing. Its claws dragged long, ringing lines into the concrete. Chains hung from its wrists and ankles, rattling quietly, the sound too soft for their weight, too intentional for their rust. It was scarred, it was enormous, and it was afraid of nothing. But Subject Alpha wasn't the thing the forest feared. No, the fear came from deeper inside the bunker. The older door, the inner door, shuddered again. A low vibration rolled beneath our feet, a tremor that felt like the earth's pulse skipping. Mercer's voice cracked. "Sir, what the hell's behind that thing?" Kane didn't answer. His eyes weren't on Alpha. They were on the shadows, spilling out behind it like a second storm. A sound rose, a rasping inhale that scraped the air, collecting every shiver, every drop of rain, every thread of fear in 100 miles. Hey, then silence. Long enough to make the forest hold its breath, long enough for thunder to forget its lines. Then, the roar wasn't loud. It was heavy, heavy enough to hit the mud and send it rippling, heavy enough to knock pine needles loose from branches, heavy enough to press my ribs inward, like hands were on my chest. Subject Alpha stepped aside, not in fear, in obedience. Something taller than the doorway unfolded from the dark. At first it resembled a shadow too wide, too long, too strangely jointed to belong to anything born under a sane sky. Then lightning struck, and for a fraction of a second, I saw it. A towering, skeletal form covered in patches of coarse, pale fur. Skin stretched tight against bones, shaped wrong, sculpted for speed, strength, and unnatural endurance. Black veins pulsed beneath its translucent hide like ink forced through cracked glass. Its head was a fusion of wolf and something humaner, skull too long, too flat, with eye sockets that burned red from within, not glowing, burning. A furnace lit behind ancient eyes. Subject Zero, the progenitor, the first. The thing that gave wolves nightmares before humans ever walked upright. Mercer collapsed to his knees. That's impossible. Kane whispered, "No, that's classified." Rain thickened, falling harder near Zero, almost solid, like a curtain of needles. Every droplet that touched its skin hissed and evaporated. The forest trembled, no dash submitted. Every werewolf surrounding the clearing lowered itself onto all fours, crouching low, heads bowed. Dozens of amber eyes glowed between the trees like lanterns following an ancient ritual. Subject Zero stepped forward, and the storm stepped with her. Each movement pulled lightning lower, dragged clouds inward, and bent wind in slow, spiraling arcs. The rain swirled around its legs like mist, devouring its own shape. "Move," Kane snapped, pulling me backward. "If it marks you, you're dead. It sees us. It sees everything." Subject Alpha growled softly toward us, not in a threat, but as a warning. Subject Zero's head rotated toward the sound, bones cracking softly. Its gaze passed over Alpha without interest. If Alpha were merely a footnote in a much older story, then it saw us. My stomach emptied, my vision tunneled. The pressure in my ears spiked so violently I thought they'd burst. Zero didn't roar. It didn't rush. It simply looked. And that look felt like sinking into water, too deep to swim out of. Kane grabbed my arm, hauling me behind a thick tree. "Don't make eye contact. What happens if I do? You'll still be staring long after your body stops breathing." A sudden gurgled scream tore through the clearing. Mercer, he was standing now, shaking rifle aimed directly at Subject Zero. Tears streaked down his face. His jaw clenched with mad resolve. "You don't get to take my team." He fired. The bullet struck Zero's torso and disintegrated. Not bounced, not ricocheted. Disintegrated into dust. Zero turned its head toward Mercer. Rain around Mercer froze, every drop suspended midair. He looked around, panicked. What is this?" "Sir." Its Zero raised one clawed hand. Rain followed the motion, spiraling into a single needle-thin stream. The stream shot forward. Mercer's scream cut short as the water struck him, not piercing, not slicing, but hitting with such force. It threw him backward 20 feet into a steel beam. His body slumped. "Still," Kane whispered. God, forgive us. Subject Alpha stepped forward, towering over Zero by only a scant margin, yet looking somehow smaller. Alpha growled low, vibrating the ground beneath us. Zero didn't respond with aggression. It responded with possession. The air thickened, Alpha's body tightened, muscles locking, breath hitching. Rain bent around the creature as if drawn into its spine. The chains on its limbs rattled violently. Zero was calling to it, commanding it, summoning its allegiance with a force older than words. Alpha bowed its head, and with that single gesture, the entire pack erupted into synchronized howls, long rising, layered, harmonizing into something ancient and terrible. A chorus of war. Kane's voice cracked. We're outmatched. We're outnumbered. And we're out of time. Subject Zero slowly turned away from Alpha toward the deeper forest, toward something we could not see. The ground shook again. A path opened in the tree's roots, pulling aside, branches bending. The forest was making way. Subject Zero stepped forward, and every werewolf followed, one by one, leaving us behind. Kane collapsed beside me, chest heaving. They didn't kill us? I whispered. No. Why? Kane's gaze locked onto the trail Zero carved. Because we're not their enemies. He swallowed hard, voice trembling. We're their message. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the first trees began to fall in the direction Zero walked. Something, massive something, not just alive, but awakening, moved in the distance. The war Subject Zero wanted had already begun. The forest didn't return to normal after Subject Zero left. It couldn't. Something in the air had changed, like the world had been tilted half a degree off center. Every breath tasted metallic, every sound carried an echo that wasn't there before. And the rain fell in thin threads instead of droplets, as though gravity itself had become indecisive. Subject Zero and the pack had gone deeper into Rainback, swallowed by darkness and storm. But even after they vanished, the trees shuddered in the hair, shape of their departure. We waited. No one spoke. No one dared move. Kane knelt beside Mercer's body, closing his eyes with the same steady hands he had used to reload his rifle minutes earlier. His face didn't break. It didn't soften. It simply tightened into something hollow and cold. Pike and Alvarez were gone. Mercer was gone. Ghost Unit legendary, unbreakable Ghost Unit, had been reduced to 2 living men and 1 trembling civilian. And the night was not finished with us. Kane, I whispered, what do we do now? He didn't answer immediately. His eyes remained locked on the trail Subject Zero carved, huge, deliberate steps that crushed roots flat, bent trunks outward, reshaped the earth like clay. Finally he stood and slung Mercer's dog tags around his own neck. We leave, he said, quietly, quickly, before it changes its mind about letting us live. And if the pack is still out there, they are, he said. But they're following orders now. They won't kill without Zero's command. And its command is, what? That we serve as witnesses? His jaw clenched. No, we're not witnesses. We're warnings. Thunder cracked overhead closer than before, a vibration that ran down the spine of every tree in the forest. We started moving. Kane led. I followed. Rainback Forest closed behind us like a mouth. The walk out was not a walk at all. We moved in, silence through dripping undergrowth. My ears strained for movement, for breathing, for claws in mud, but the pack's presence had shifted. Their violence earlier was fierce, erratic, nearly feral. Now they watched like sentinels. Every so often, I caught glimmers of amber eyes, several yards out, silent, unmoving. Not stalking, not curious, just monitoring. Kane noticed too. They're guarding the perimeter. Guarding it from who? He looked at me with an expression that shifted the ground beneath my feet. From us. We reached the old skid trail, though it didn't look like the same path we'd taken in. The earth near the bunker had twisted, roots coiled upward like they'd been disturbed from below. The storm hadn't calmed, it followed us, lingering as a constant whisper, as if it wanted to hear our footsteps. Twice Kane raised his fist and stopped dead. Twice I froze behind him, heart drumming against my ribs. We listened, not for werewolves, but for something else. A heavier presence, a dragging step. Chains rattling somewhere too far and too near at once. Subject Zero was far, larger than the others, but its steps were surgical, barely audible, like a massive predator accustomed to stealth. The tremors in the earth weren't from its footsteps, they were from whatever it woke. Faster, Kane whispered. We obeyed the clearing where firelight should have been. When we finally reached the logging clearing, it wasn't empty. 3 of the werewolves stood in the open, arranged like statues. Their fur dripped with rain, muscles trembling faintly, not from exhaustion, from restraint. They weren't here to kill. They were here to guide us out. A path lay open between them, an aisle carved into the mud like a scar. Beyond it, faint gold light flickered through the storm. Kane stared at them, every instinct screaming to raise his rifle. But they didn't move, didn't growl, didn't even breathe loudly. It's a corridor, he muttered. A controlled exit, like they're letting us go. No. Kane shook his head, like they're escorting us. We stepped between them. I kept my eyes down, afraid of provoking anything ancient and territorial enough to tear men in half without losing composure. When we passed the last werewolf, its head lowered not, as a threat, as a mark, a brand, a reminder that we had seen what no human should. The trucks sat exactly where we'd left them untouched, silent, steam rising from their hoods. The soldiers who'd stayed behind stared at us with eyes wide from fear and disbelief. Kane didn't explain, didn't debrief, didn't mention the bunker. He simply pointed at the vehicles. Mount up. We leave. But, sir, one soldier protested. Move, Kane commanded, voice cracking like a shot. They obeyed. The ride back where truth became a lightly, why didn't speak on the drive out of Rainback. The rain followed us to the forest's edge, then stopped dead, like someone cut the sky open with a knife. Beyond the boundary, everything was calm, dry, peaceful, unchanged. It was as if the storm had never existed. When we passed into the clear, several soldiers looked back in disbelief. The forest behind us was black, motionless, utterly silent. One soldier whispered, "What the hell happened in there?" Kane didn't turn, he didn't answer. But I saw his reflection in the windshield, and I saw something break inside him. The debrief that wasn't at base. Medical teams dragged us into quarantine. They checked for scratches, bites, blood contamination. They did not check for trauma.org. Truth high-ranking officers arrived within the hour, not military brass government suits. They asked no questions. They issued statements disguised as orders. There was no bunker. There was no Subject Alpha. No Subject Zero. No pack. No survivors, except your team. Kane stared them down with a stillness so cold it frightened them or should have. You don't get to bury this, he said. That's exactly what we're going to do, the Leadsuth replied. And you're going to help us. And if we don't, the man smiled without smiling. You will. Kane didn't respond. He didn't have to. They weren't giving us a choice. But the forest had already chosen differently. What followed me 2 days later, when they released me, I drove until the road turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt, and the dirt turned to nothing. I reached my cabin, shut the door, and waited to wake from the nightmare. But nightmares don't leave footprints. And 3 nights after I returned, it rained. Not like normal, not like weather, it pulsed, slow, rhythmic, measured, like a heartbeat. I opened my door, at the tree-lined amber eyes watched me, not hunting, not threatening, waiting. The rain curved around, its silhouette like a halo. Then something deeper moved behind it, heavy footsteps, dragging chains, lightning catching pale fur, a shape too tall for the trees to hide. Subject: 0. It hadn't come to kill me. It had come to remind me, to make sure the message stayed alive. The forest wants its war back. Subject 0 wants its soldiers. And the rain. The rain carries their whispers now. Every storm since that night has carried the same rhythm. That slow, steady heartbeat counting down.